How are you? Good. You? You have a question? Oh, okay. What did you say? Hare Krishna. You're well? Happy? Everyone here is okay? In the back? Hare Krishna. Good. Okay. Well, we're lucky to be here tonight, Hare Krishna, with the Bhagavad Gita, because this is a place where we can take shelter and regroup by hearing from Krishna. And in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, thank you. There's a very interesting section. Of course, it's all interesting, but in various ways. For those who are on the path of self-realization, because Arjuna asks Krishna specifically what the symptoms are of a person who's self-realized. And knowing what those are, what the symptoms are, is sometimes overlooked. Sometimes people accept unverifiable types of qualities for somebody being self-realized. But here Krishna mentions qualities that are verifiable. And not only that, because he's the authority, we can have a clear understanding of what it means, not just for observing it in others, but more importantly for observing it in ourselves, and seeing, am I advancing in devotional service? Am I gaining ground? So here's the question that Arjuna asks in the second chapter, 54th verse. And he says, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak and what is his language? How does he sit and how does he walk? So what are some of the things Arjuna just asked?
Hare Krishna. So one thing I remember is how does he speak?
Yes, how does he speak? And what are some of the other things that Arjuna asks?
How does he walk and what does he do?
How does he walk? Anything else?
How does he sit?
Yes. So these are very practical and observable. And we can observe them in ourselves. So again, Arjuna says, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak and what is his language? How does he sit and how does he walk? So in the word for words, let's look at that. So give us an indication of Stita Pragdasya is one who is situated in fixed Krishna consciousness. So stita means to be fixed in something. It's a cognate in English for the word stand. Sometimes we use it in various ways, like there's the common word understanding. Do you understand? Which means that you're situated in a certain conception of something. And pragdasya means one who's attained spiritual consciousness. So stita pragnasya, somebody who's fixed in Krishna consciousness. And then the question ka, what? Bhasha, language. So we talked on Sunday about ways in which Krishna recommends that we reform our language. There's a practice that he mentions in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita for speech. And he says that our speech should be truthful, beneficial. We should avoid speech that offends, and we should regularly recite the Vedas. And so this bhasha is very important. It is one of the ways in which Prabhupada will mention in the purport, we can immediately detect if somebody is a fool, because Prabhupada writes that a fool is not detected until he speaks. And then there's the old saying that he had nothing to say and then he said it. So bhasha is the language. And then samadhi stasya, one who is situated in trance. And this is the trance of Krishna consciousness through which one is aware that everything's connected to Krishna. One's observing the world, but is seeing it in terms of the scriptures. This is called Shastra Chakshu. There's a description by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita of the different energies of the world. And some of them are gross material energies like earth, water, fire, air. And then there's ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. These are the subtle, gross material energies. And we can observe all of these various energies because we're observers, called sakshi in the Bhagavatam, that we're witnesses to all these things. And we can also understand from reading the Gita that all these energies come from Krishna. So in one sense, they are Krishna because they emanate from him. So the material world has a connection with him. And Shukadeva Goswami, in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, points out to Parikshit Maharaj the universal form. And he says for the beginner yogi, observing the world and all the energies as part of Krishna, as the universe as the body of Krishna, is the first step in God realization. And in that observation, he points out how the rivers are the veins of the universal form of the Lord, and the mountains are the stacks of his bones, and the trees are the hairs on the body of the Lord, and the days and nights are the blinking of his eyes. So if one hears this and then begins to observe the world as the energy of Krishna, or actually as Krishna himself, because in one sense the energetic and the energy that comes from the energetic are the same. They're the same and different at the same time. When I first got the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and I read in Prabhupada's purport about how a blade of grass doesn't move without the sanction of the Supreme. I remember reading that and then watching how things were moving in my yard at my house, and I was thinking, oh, that's being moved by the Supreme, because he's sarva karana karanam, the cause of all causes. And whatever happens in the world ultimately comes from Krishna. Whatever is manifest comes from Krishna. Aham sarvasya prabhavo, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita later on, that everything comes from me. And observing the world in that way, and then also seeing that everything in the world, all the energy and all the circumstances, whatever assets I have, through the process of karma yoga, are meant to be engaged in Krishna's service. And the very life energy that I have is meant to be engaged in his service. Krishna says here in this second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, karma nye varikaraste mapalishu kadachana the sarva karma, ma karma sarva hetu bhur, nate sangostu karmani. He advises that don't try to claim proprietorship over whatever fruits you get from the work that you do. Also, he said, don't become non-active and say, because they're not my fruits, therefore I won't do anything. So he said you have a right to perform your duty, but don't become attached to the fruits of action, and also don't become attached to not doing your duty. And one who works in this way and observes the energies of the world, and then begins to develop a sense of how everything is meant for a higher purpose. It's meant to be engaged in the service of the divine source of everything, Krishna. Develops a sense of bhakti. Everything can be used in the service of the Lord. And also, and I'm still speaking about this samadhi stasya, or situated in trance, there's a way preliminarily that a practitioner of spiritual life, Krishna says, becomes aware of the fact that he or she is not the body. But the body is going on as part of the material nature, just as much as we see the workings of material nature. Like, what ways do you see the material world working? Day and night. So there's the movement of the planets. Anything else? Seasons, yeah. What else is churning out there? Trees are growing, blossoming. People are getting old. Rains. Anything else? I mean, there's a lot moving out there. There's a lot of systems, and nature is working in inconceivable ways. In fact, we see how ecosystems are so balanced. This morning when I was out picking flowers for the deities, I saw the bees were out, moving about, and I was thinking, how big is your brain, sir? When I saw a little bee. And he said, doesn't matter, I know where to go. I got my thing here. And they go in, dart in the flower, they go out, they know right where to go back to their hive. They have a queen bee that they follow, and she does a special dance, and according to the dance, everybody knows what to do. She does a special dance, they all know to vacate and go somewhere else. They'll follow the queen bee. These are amazing events in nature, and they're going on all the time. And the person who becomes stita pragnasya, samadhi stasya, fixed in trance, observes that my body and mind are merely moving as part of the material nature, and that I actually have nothing to do with them. This is stated in the Vedas, asango hyayam purushaha, that I have no real connection with this temporary body and mind. I'm only tenuously connected to it for a short term because of some momentum from my past lives. And this is described by Krishna also in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tatvavit pashan shrinvan spisanjigran ashnan gachan swapan spasan pralapan vishrajan grinnan unmishan nimishan napi indriyan indriyateshu vartanta iti dharayan. He says that this self-realized person, or the person fixed in this samadhi, stasya, in samadhi, is aware that my body is moving, but I'm doing nothing at all. I'm observing it going on. And he mentions the various movements of the body that take place. For instance, opening and closing of the eyes. Are you calibrating that right now? Maybe you are now that I mentioned it. But you weren't before. Since you walked in here, you were unaware of the fact that your eyes are blinking. That's a very complicated mechanism. My great-grandfather helped invent the intermittent windshield wiper. He was an inventor. And that took a lot of hard work and engineering prowess. And then if you think about the eye, it's even more sophisticated. And that's going on all the time as part of material nature, but I have nothing to do with it. There's also the heart beating. And I oftentimes notice the heart. In fact, Prikishori wrote something to me after I talked about this in a class, that there's a certain condition that some people, psychological conditions people develop when they become overly aware of their heart. Because it's a little scary when you think about it, that you really have no say in how the heart beats, do you? You thinking about it now? Are you making it beat, or is it just cooperating with you and going along? Which is it? You don't have anything to do with it. And so if you analyze all the different functions of your body, for instance, homeostasis, it's the way in which the body achieves a balanced temperature, or steady temperature. And that goes on through a various sort of a cooling and heating system that's in the body. And that happens naturally. When I recently had the flu, I noticed that the temperature was high and high and high every day for many days. And then finally, when I took my temperature and I noticed it was 98.6, and he's like, why 98.6? Why not? Why doesn't everybody have a different number? But it's all the same. The body and the mind are inextricably connected to material nature. Not even that they're connected, they're part of it. Whereas I, as the observer, am separate from that. I'm merely the observer. So the verse I quoted, the long verse from the second chapter of the Gita, says as much, that the person who's in samadhi, and if you can get a microphone, what? It's chapter 5, correct, chapter 5. The naiva kinchit means that this is one of the ways in which a person is known or can observe in oneself to be in spiritual consciousness, to be aware of the fact that the bodily functions are going on, but I actually have nothing to do with them. I am an observer only, and traveling in a particular body through a particular time and space in the universe, and I didn't have any say in that either, did I? Did I? No. I came out and people informed me through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and all the way up, said, this is where you are, right here. And they don't even know, actually. They just know what they've been told. So basically, in ignorance. So somebody who's fixed in spiritual consciousness is also aware of the fact that he or she is swimming in an ocean of ignorance. And the trance is the trance of self-realization. That is, understanding one's eternal connection to one's original divine source, Krishna. And that as a conscious entity, one has no connection with the material world and an eternal connection with the spiritual world. This is an awareness that one develops while advancing in spiritual life. In the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that beyond this material nature, there's a different nature, which is eternal, and it's never annihilated. He goes into a summary of the way in which this material nature is constantly destroyed and then recreated. It goes through these cycles. And similarly, this body is as well. It's part of, it's like a small universe. And the universe, just as my body is created and goes through the dwindling and then destruction phase, so similarly the universe does also. But Krishna says there's a different world that you're part of that doesn't go through these phases. It's not subject to destruction at any time. And this is part of the awareness of a person who's in trance. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Param Sada Pashanti Suryo Divavichaksha Tatam Tad Vipraso Vipandirbo Jagrivansaha Smindate Vishnu Yat Paramam Padam. A person, although walking in this world, is aware of the spiritual world and one's connection to it. And this can be developed even as one's involved with the material world. So there is much more to say about being situated in trance. There are preliminary stages, obviously, and middle stages, and very advanced stages of this kind of samadhi stasya, or being situated in trance. And that's chalked out throughout the various bhakti scriptures very carefully. So then he says, stitati, one who's fixed in consciousness. And then he asks again, Kim, what? Prabhasheta, speaks. Kim, how? Asita, does remain still. And vrajeta, walks. The interesting about remaining still, and one can observe this in one's own consciousness, is it possible to remain still? And what is it that gets me up and moving? Like, have you ever tried to remain still for a little while in your mind? Just focus focus inwardly, and then I might be jolted back into movement because I think of many things that I should be doing, and it's very difficult for me to remain still. And vrajeta, I'm walking for various reasons. People walk for various reasons. What are some of the reasons that people walk? Walk to school, yep. Walk to the temple. Where? For health. Huh? Go to the store. So the legs are senses, and they can be utilized in various ways. And this is a very fundamental question that Arjuna is asking. So when a person is in higher consciousness, how does he or she use his or her legs? We may be moving about the world and walking here and there. In fact, someone may recall an experience, you might recall an experience where you were walking somewhere and you were thinking, why am I going there? I wish I wasn't. Have you ever had that experience? You're walking one direction and going somewhere where you wish either you didn't have to go, or you're thinking it's not a good idea, but you're still walking there anyway? You've had that happen? Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not the only one. We may be moved to walk in a certain direction and go someplace, and I may be thinking, I don't want to go there, or I shouldn't be going, but I'm walking anyway. I'm going in that direction. So how does one in spiritual consciousness walk? So let's look at the translation now that we looked at word for word. Arjuna said, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak and what is his language? How does he sit and how does he walk? And here's Prabhupada's purport. As there are symptoms for each and every man in terms of his particular situation, similarly, one who is Krishna conscious has his particular nature, talking, walking, thinking, feeling, etc. As a rich man has his symptoms by which he is known as a rich man, as a diseased man has his symptoms by which he is known as diseased, or as a learned man has his symptoms, so a man in transcendental consciousness of Krishna has specific symptoms in various dealings. One can know his specific symptoms from the Bhagavad Gita. Most important is how the man in Krishna consciousness speaks, for speech is the most important quality of any man. It is said that a fool is undiscovered as long as he does not speak, and certainly a well-dressed fool cannot be identified unless he speaks. But as soon as he speaks, he reveals himself at once. The immediate symptom of a Krishna-conscious man is that he speaks only of Krishna and of matters relating to him. Other symptoms then automatically follow as stated below. And now we'll look at the next verse. This verse is Krishna's first answer to Arjuna's questions. And wouldn't you want to hear those? These answers to his questions? Say yes. Yes. So, Sri Bhagavanu Vacha means that the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, and then the first word in his answer is prajahati. He gives up. And yada, when kamam, desires for sense gratification, sarvam partha manogatan. So this means that he's naming the first symptom of somebody who's in self-realization. Scroll down a little bit. And he's too much. He's naming the first symptom, and that is that the person is able to detach himself from the demands of the mind. The mind is like an idea factory, and it keeps putting out ideas for sense gratification, because when the mind is conditioned, it's in tune with the various kinds of sense objects and how to get them. And when the intelligence is in the mode of passion or rajas, there's a way in which it's looking in the environment and trying to find ways in which to enjoy it and to exploit it. So one of the first symptoms of a person who's advancing in spiritual life is that one develops a kind of power, yoga balena, spiritual power through yoga, by which one is able to not simply follow the demands of the mind or identify with the various desires that it puts forth, but is able to see the mind's demands and desires as something that's coming from material nature and that is not me. It's separate from me. We'll find at the very end of this chapter that Krishna gives a metaphor for this, and he says it's like an ocean that is being filled by thousands of rivers. They're rushing into the ocean. But the ocean stays still. It doesn't change, even though it's being constantly influenced by the rivers. At least they're trying to influence, but it's not influenceable because it's so vast. And in the same way, he says, does Krishna, that the person who has this advancement spiritually is able to notice that there are desires and impulses coming from the mind, and he doesn't react to them. He sees them as a force of nature, of the lower nature, that's separate from me. It has nothing to do with my ultimate interest, and therefore is not disturbed by them. So that's what he's saying in the first answer he gives to Arjuna, and this is something that we can observe in ourselves. So prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan. So manogatan means that the mind goes, and it really goes. It spins and it spins. Sometimes it's compared to a ceiling fan, where you get some kind of worry going and it goes around and around and around, and you might just keep looking up there and it'll keep spinning and taking you around and around. But the person who is self-realized has become detached from this and has a perspective in which you can see that this is not me, it's the movement of material nature. And then he goes on to say something very positive, that is the other side. On one side, he's detached, but one can't simply remain detached. One has to go somewhere, because after all, we are living entities and we do have desires. However, where can one go? Here he says Atman, so the words in the individual word meanings. Atmani, in the pure state of the soul, he says, eva, certainly atmana, by the purified mind. Tushta. And then we scroll down a little bit more and we find tushta means satisfied. Stita pragna, translated situated. Tada, at that time, uchate is said. So here's his first answer, that one becomes detached from the way in which the mind presents unlimited desires, longings, ideas for enjoying the material world. Practically speaking, the mind is in sync with the various modes of material nature and becomes conditioned by it. And so naturally it goes to various kinds of ideas for sense enjoyment. But a person who is advancing spiritually has the wherewithal to see the difference between his or her self and the movements of the mind, and then also has some place satisfactory to go. Not just a kind of detachment, but then atmanyevatmana tushta stita pragnatas tadochite, which means that the person becomes aware of his or her own self. That means the self can become aware of itself. And that is also that the self becomes aware of the super self and the very fact that I'm not part of the body or the mind, but I'm the consciousness that resides within the body that can be seen by the self. The self can see itself, and then can become aware of the Supreme Self, who is described by Shukadeva Goswami in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam as the self of the self. I know how much I am invested in myself because I've mistaken my body to be the self, and I do everything I possibly can for the body. So the scriptures ask us to then observe, then logically understand, first of all, you're not your body, but you've projected yourself into the body, and therefore you give it so much care and attention. So think how much you must really like yourself. And then think of how much you would like the self of yourself. That's Krishna. He's the source of yourselves. And this kind of thinking about self-realization, as we read on Sunday night, one of the austerities of the mind is to always think about self-realization. This gives one tushta, or satisfaction. And as Prabhupada mentioned in his purports to the verses we read on Sunday night about the austerities of the mind, that as soon as I start connecting with the desires and the thoughts that are being manufactured by the mind, and I think, let me pursue these, that's when I immediately feel dissatisfaction. And it's immediate, just as my thoughts go in that direction. So in today's verse, stita pragnasa atmanyevatmana tushta, we can appreciate the two levels of this verse. The first is the person is situated. They actually have a standing in spiritual life. This is practical. When they're able to detach from the mind and see it's a lower energy and it's just moving because it's conditioned in certain ways. And not identify, not hold on to the various urges and desires that come from the mind. And then simultaneously, and this is where one's getting the ability to do this, is atmanyevatmana tushta, is feeling satisfaction in the self. Now this is a very fortunate and wealthy person. If one is able to have atmatushta, or satisfaction in the self, then what else does one need? Factually, no matter what assets I get in this world, they'll never be enough, and they won't satisfy me. As soon as I get something, like if you get a technological thing, and there are many, but it's mostly represented nowadays by the iPhone or the Apple Watch. As soon as you get it, it becomes obsolete because that industry is moving so fast that you can't find any satisfaction in it because it's part of the material nature, and the idea that I should be able to enjoy it is erroneous anyway. But if I try to hold on to it, then it will slip through my fingers, just like water dripping through. And I'll never actually feel any satisfaction with trying to gather together the disparate energies of the world and combine them in such a way that I'll feel happy or satisfied. However, if one finds the self, if one actually is able to identify the self within and notice its characteristic and see that it's that I, the self, am not part of the moving material world, but I'm stationary, I'm eternally settled. I mean, the very fact that the soul can't be burned, dried, cut. The body can be burned, dried, or cut, but the soul can't be. And if one is the soul and is aware of that, then the fear of non-existence disappears. This is a point mentioned by Srila Prabhupada in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, that I'm being stalked by the tigress of non-existence. Around any corner, I feel that I can be attacked, and whatever I have now will be taken away, and I'll lose it. I'll lose my body, and this is a constant struggle when I identify with the mind and identify with the body. But as soon as I identify with the self, and I'm situated in that conception, then at this point, Krishna describes as the Brahma-bhuta platform. In the 18th chapter of the Gita, he says, Brahma-bhuta prasanatma. So first of all, when one comes to this awareness of one's self as separate from matter, and
This session is no longer being recorded.
and sees that I'm eternal and I can't be killed, burned, dried, then prasanatma, one naturally feels joyful. Here it's mentioned tushta, and of course everyone's looking for that satisfaction. People try to anoint themselves in various ways so that they'll feel satisfaction and they'll be able to satisfy other people. For instance, people wear various scents, like Old Spice. That's a cologne that's been around forever. And they have identified with that smell, that I put that on my body, and then I smell a certain way, and they've listened to a commercial that tells them that if they wear this scent, then they'll attract people. They'll think that you're a great person or something like that. And all these kinds of ways in which I try to organize my external body and mind are ultimately futile. I never feel any satisfaction, and ultimately I don't feel any joy from it. But as soon as one identifies with the self, then prasanatma, then one feels joyful and one feels satisfied. And then also, nashochati nakangshati, there's a palpable and noticeable disappearance of lamentation, because the soul is forever optimistic, because it's eternal. And there's nothing lamentable in the soul. And nashochati nakangshati. And there's no hankering for the objects of the senses in self-realization, because one sees those things as superfluous. Anybody here ever experienced fasting for some time? It's kind of an interesting experience. If you fast for a day, then, you might, we don't have any days that we fast for more than one day. But if you fast completely for one day, sometimes, after the initial hankering to eat something goes away, because there's a relay system, the stomach starts to complain and say that, I hurt, I'm going to die if you don't feed me. It's sort of a desperation. It's like, you trying to kill us all here? I got to eat. It's survival mode going on, and it seems very desperate. But after if one has a little bit of buddhi, intelligence, and understands, well, fasting's good for you. You can just tell them, just calm down, and you're going to be okay. You'll be better. And later on, and then as one goes through the day and realizes, I'm surviving, I'm still alive, I don't need to eat. Then you start thinking, actually, it's easier not to eat, because I don't have to work as hard. There's a lot of work that goes into eating and so forth. And there is a state of consciousness in which the next day someone gives you something to eat, and then you think like, I'm not really interested anymore. I can't really relate to that anymore. Eating is such a gross activity. There's the mastication and actually the whole digestive process and everything. And we have glimpses where we can see, actually, I'm a subtler entity than the body. Sometimes when people have a near-death experience, they leave their body, and then they hover over the body, and they'll describe after, they're revived. Because there are ways in which the heart may stop, but then by some external help, the heart might start pumping again, and then the person comes alive. They come back into their body, and then they realize that, or they say that from my perspective, after when I left my body, I was looking down and I was thinking, ew, I don't want to go back into that thing. That's pretty gross, because we're very subtle. The Atma, the self, is a different category of energy. But I identify so much with this lower energy, and it's quite striking when one is able to develop a perspective of detachment from the lower energy of the body and identifying with the body and mind, and then also actually feeling for oneself, seeing for oneself the happiness within the self, seeing the self by the self, and just being in that state of joyfulness. It's a great relief. Like if you have a huge debt you're carrying around with you for a long time, like student loan. Did that make your heart rate go up when I said that? And, people, even I know rich people, and they say, I still have student loans. Like, for God's sake, just pay it off, But, it's a debt you carry around for the rest of your life, student loan, because the government's so tyrannical to keep the people in debt all the time. Little social commentary. And so then if someone comes along, just pays your debt one day, you forgot about it, becomes part of your psyche that I'm in debt, I'm in debt, I'm in debt. And someone comes along and just says, hey, I paid your student loan off. And it's like, really? Wow, I don't have that anymore. There's a sense of relief from that. Material life is all debt. It's crushing debt. From day to night, every moment of the day, I'm being crushed by this feeling of being in debt. And I'm born with it. It's in my psyche that I have to survive. Survival means debt. I have a debt to pay, and the collector's going to come anytime and take everything back. And this is a great burden to carry around for the Atma, who's so subtle. And when that's lifted suddenly by the vision of eternity, that I have nothing to do with that debt. Hey, by the way, it was in the wrong account. It wasn't you after all. You don't know anything. It's like, really? No kidding. Wow, I feel great. You just suddenly, it's lifted. So Krishna describes this, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. All of a sudden you become joyful because you realize, hey, I don't belong to this world at all. I have nothing to do with it. It's not me. It's not my account. And so Nashochati Nakangshati, the hankering lamentation, is like, why would I want that? Just as a person who's felt the subtlety of not depending on food, then suddenly looks and says, like, I'm not so interested. Sarvabhauma once, he was so into fasting. He fasted for 5 days, I think, without water. And then we had to force him to eat because he was like, I don't want to eat anymore. I said, Sarva, you got to eat. But I could see how living entities can do that. They just become like, I'm not interested anymore. It's I'm not into that. Of course, that's a very artificial thing. Krishna says in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, if you try to artificially restrict the senses, then they'll spring back on you. Specifically, he mentions fasting. If you try to restrict the tongue artificially and just hold it back, then it'll come back and demand twice as much and say, look, now you owe me more. You have to have this sense of atmanyevatmana tushta, satisfaction in the self. So these are symptoms that everyone, this is practical, it's non-sectarian, it's something that any human being especially is equipped to experience in the process of yoga, if we is meant to bring us to this point. In fact, I was listening to the Harinam Chintamani yesterday, and I heard something, Haridas Thakur speaking to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about the yoga process of chanting the holy names, which is, by the way, he proves through various scriptures to be the topmost of all yoga processes. And it brings one to this point of atmanyevatmana tushta. If one chants and avoids the offenses and is careful to listen to the mantra with respect, then what Haridas Thakur says, the mantra becomes your guru. The mantra, among other things, he names other qualities of the mantra, but he says the mantra is your guru. It'll guide you to self-realization. It's not like you have to speculate to come to this point and think, now I'm going to become an Atma and so forth. But you already are an Atma, but you need a guru to get there, guidance. And the guidance is Krishna. And of course, then Krishna manifests externally as the Shiksha gurus, Diksha gurus, and so forth. And there's lots of ways in which he helps. But one of the ways is as the holy name. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his Sharanagati, confirms at the very last verse about how through the perfection of chanting, the holy name personified takes him by the hand and leads him back to his relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world. So now I want to look at the next verse. No, actually I want to read the purport, and then we'll take a few reflections. So this verse says in the English translation, in its entirety, which will require just a few inches higher. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. Purport. The Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness or devotional service of the Lord has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendently situated has no good qualifications, because he is sure to be taking refuge in his own mental concoctions. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desires cannot be stopped. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna consciousness without hesitation, for this devotional service will instantly help one onto the platform of transcendental consciousness. It will instantly help one. The Guru principle in the holy name. Where were we? The highly developed soul. You're all highly developed souls. The highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. And before we take reflections, let's look at the next verse, because it's there. And it's been on my mind, this verse, at least when I walked in here. And I'll say it and please repeat. Dukeshwanu vigna manaha Sukeshu vigataspraha Vitaraga Payakroda Stitatir Munir Uchate. So Krishna says here in this translation, one who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So this is further definition of the stita prajna, or some persons fixed in Krishna consciousness. And some of the elements that we see here are that is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries. So this is one point one can notice, and that is that there will be various disturbances to the mind because of the threefold miseries. Maybe you name a few of them? Things that disturb their mind?
Misery is caused by nature.
Depression?
Misery is caused by nature, earthquake.
Paying bills? Stress at work? I mean, we could go on and on. If you notice, there are a lot of stressors that come into the mind. And there's also causes for elation when there is happiness. But these things are in relationship to the temporary body and mind, that I've gained some advantage or I've perceived some disadvantage. And this is all due to the perception that I'm this material body, but because the person's beyond the conception or identification with the body and the mind as the self, then when these things come and go, he or she is not disturbed by them. Notices that they're coming through, but doesn't identify with them. This is simply the result of my proximity to the material world, but it's not me. And whatever things come into my life, good or bad, are reactions to things that I've done in the past. And there's a certain amount of happiness that will come into my life and a certain amount of distress that will come into my life automatically because it's fixed from my previous activities. And therefore there's a reckoning with the comings and goings of happiness and distress that a self-realized person has. And a relationship that I have no relationship. That I had a relationship, but now I realize that it's superfluous to myself and to where I'm going. And then, it's free from attachment, fear, and anger. These things three. So Krishna is Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha. Raga means that I become desirous of possessing matter and controlling it and enjoying it in various ways. So the Stita D, he's fixed in consciousness in his meditation on the higher self. Then is not, he gives up these three things. Vita means to give up. So Vita Raga means attachment, and Bhaya means fear. And the fear arises because of my identification with the material body. Bhayam dvitiya abhinibeshata syad. Syad means to arise, and the Bhagavatam says that bhaya syad. But fear arises when I think that I'm my body. And so when one's out of the bodily conception of life, the fear then becomes quelled. And in another verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada describes this fear as also fear of a personal existence. There's a sense that I've been so troubled by my interaction with people and with my relationships, because either their relationships here are very troubling because I'm not compatible with the people. They may even be people who capture me and enslave me. They may be people who torture me. They may be very dear to me, But in either case, one case, I wish I wasn't with them, and the other case, I wish I was, but then they leave anyway, for one reason or another. And there's a sense that one can develop a fear of personal existence. There's another kind of bhaya, that one can, a psychological condition that one develops from being in the material world for too long. Yeah, you've been here too long, sir. You've become conditioned with this fearfulness of personal existence. And that type of fear may induce this desire, might bring on this desire that I want to become nothing. That my ultimate goal in life is, because material life, my personal existence is so painful, I conceive of happiness as just being non-existent. I don't want to think about being a person anymore, or being a soul. Anatmana, this is a philosophy actually, that one may sign up for, because it's there and available. It's systematized. You can say, okay, I'm not an Atma, and here are the reasons I'm not an Atma. And Krishna says you have to get over that in order to actually be happy and advance in spiritual life. So that bhaya has a lot of implications. And then finally, krodha, anger. And we know anger, from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as well, comes from desiring something, becoming attached to it, and then not being able to get it or enjoy it the way one thought one would be able to. And that creates this kind of anger. And there's another kind of anger that Krishna describes, and Prabhupada elaborates upon in a similar verse, where these three attitudes are mentioned, these three qualities. And this krodha can come about when one's not able to discern the proper philosophy in life and hears many, many philosophies. You can hear from so many people, and then one can become bitter or pessimistic, and then become angry about the fact that there are any philosophies at all. Like George Carlin. Anybody know the comedian George Carlin? Besides Satyadev Prabhu? Well, he was a famous comedian in America. He died a few years ago. I just happened to meet him at the airport once. But he was an atheist. And he used to rail against religion and governments and all kinds of things. People like to hear him rail. And he was pretty smart guy. And he sort of epitomized this kind of anger that can develop. And then it can become systematized also, in which one fortifies oneself from taking to a religious, spiritual process by just saying, like, look, there's so many different options out there, so many philosophies, and there have been so many people who were hypocritical, who were propounding these philosophies, and it just becomes overwhelmingly complicated, so then one can conclude, okay, there's nothing. There is no real philosophy. This is similar to the nihilistic idea that there's no self. There's no clear philosophy, and there's no axiomatic truth. It's all relative truths. You just make it up as you go along. This won't lead to any good results, Krishna says. In fact, in the 9th chapter of Gita, Krishna says, Ashradadhana Purusha Dharmasya Parantapa Aprapyamam Nivartante Mrityu Samsaravartmani. And that is, he said, if you are ashradadhana, you have no faith, then the result is that you just get dominated by the material nature, and you have to go through the cycle of birth and death. Until you meet a devotee and you start to soften your heart and get some knowledge, some sambandha gyan of your relationship with God, and then you can start to calm down a little bit and start to come to this point of being stita-di. That means that you're extremely fixed. You know how to prioritize. You know what the different kinds of energies are. There are higher and lower energies, and you have a way of interacting with them so that for your highest benefit. And when you have that, then you can experience this happiness in life, because you know you're going in the right direction. So Krishna says, Shradadhana Purusha Dharmasya Paranta Aprapyamam Nivartante. He said, you don't get anything from that atheistic idea. Aprapya, you don't attain me. Mrityu samsara, so the path you're on is called mrityu and samsara. You go back into the cycle of birth and death in the material world. So now, as a special treat, we'll hear the purport to the verse that we're mostly focusing on here. And Prabhupada writes, the word muni means one who can agitate his mind in various ways for mental speculation without coming to a factual conclusion. It is said that every muni has a different angle of vision, and unless a muni differs from other munis, he cannot be called a muni in the strict sense of the term. Na savrishir yasya matam nabinnam. But a stita deer muni, as mentioned herein by the Lord, is different from an ordinary muni. The stita deer muni is always in Krishna consciousness, for he has exhausted all his business of creative speculation. He is called Prashanta Nishesha Manoratantara, or one who has surpassed the stage of mental speculations and has come to the conclusion that Lord Sri Krishna or Vasudeva is everything. Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. He is called a muni fixed in mind. Such a fully Krishna conscious person is not at all disturbed by the onslaughts of the threefold miseries, for he accepts all miseries as the mercy of the Lord, thinking himself only worthy of more trouble due to his past misdeeds. And he sees that his miseries, by the grace of the Lord, are minimized to the lowest. Similarly, when he is happy, he gives credit to the Lord, thinking himself unworthy of the happiness. He realizes that it is due only to the Lord's grace that he is in such a comfortable condition and able to render better service to the Lord. George Carlin did take a book, by the way. And for the service of the Lord, he is always daring and active and not influenced by attachment or aversion. He's always daring and active and not influenced by attachment or aversion. Attachment means accepting things for one's own sense gratification, and detachment is the absence of such sensual attachment. But when fixed in Krishna consciousness, has neither attachment nor detachment, because his life is dedicated to the service of the Lord. Consequently, he is not at all angry, even when his attempts are unsuccessful. Success or no success, a Krishna conscious person is always steady in his determination. So that's the last verse that I wanted to bring to your attention, but there's a nice succession of thought through those several verses we looked at. Because in the beginning, Arjuna asks his question, what are the symptoms? And he wants to know how the person sits, walks, speaks. And then Krishna answers and says, the person gives up mental concoction and feels satisfaction in the self. And then we have this Stita D Muni, which is a kind of Muni who is has a clear direction to his spiritual practice, which is focused on serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And there's a lot that goes into that. There's direction from the scripture. There's also help from the Vaishnavas. One has to cultivate sambandha gyan. Oftentimes, people have many misconceptions, and those have to be sorted out. People have many doubts, and those have to be dissipated by hearing from the authorized Shastra and from the Guru. And as one does that, one gradually becomes a Stita D Muni. That is, one's meditation, one's consciousness is focused on the Supreme and on devotional practice, which keeps one's senses properly engaged in the Lord's service. When one's senses are engaged in Krishna's service, they take on a spiritual quality, as mentioned by Rupa Goswami as Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Iha yasya harer dasye karmana manasa gira, nikila apyavastastu, jivan mukta uchate. So what he's saying, there's a kind of mukti or liberation that one will experience even while one's living in this present body. And that comes about when one gets proper association and knowledge and is able to engage his or her senses in the service of Krishna. And then, even while in the body, iha yasya hirdasya, because one's karmana manasagira, that means one's body, one's mind, and one's speech then are engaged in Krishna's service, then one becomes jivan mukta suuchite. You're still in the material world, still in the body, but you become liberated even as you're living in the body. So that's altogether possible, and that takes place by becoming a stita di muni, which requires the help of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And now we'll take a few reflections. Means anything that you heard so far that's stuck in your mind that you can utilize. Yes. Shraddha, you were first.
Oh.
You go right ahead.
I was going to read. So we have Vaikunt Nayak Prabhu from India. He's on the call.
Vaikuntha Nayak.
Yeah.
That's big news.
And one of the points that struck him was your comment that how much you like yourself, so how much you should be liking the self of yourself, the super soul.
Yeah. Atmanam akilatmanam. This was a statement of Shukadeva Goswami when he said, just notice that Krishna is the soul of all souls. And he comments that people do anything to save themselves in this world. They'll sacrifice anything to save themselves, practically. And then he said, see how much they love the self. People love the self. Can you grab that section? It's in the 10th canto, 14th chapter, near the end. The verses are very powerful. So yes, the self of the self. What else? Yes.
Hare Krishna. I like the point, mantra is your guru and it will guide you.
Isn't that reassuring? It's so nice. And the mind has to be convinced to take shelter somewhere. And this is why I mentioned one has to hear from Shastra, one has to hear from Guru, because the mind has to be coaxed. It's one of my friends in business, Jim Walters, he passed away a few years ago, but he used to say about really expert salespeople, he'd say, that guy could talk a dog off a meat wagon. I was thinking, there's a guy going, there's a meat wagon and a dog's on the wagon, he's already in there. And somebody's like, come here, boy, come on. How do you talk him off of there? How do you talk the mind out of being attached to matter? It requires a very high level of expertise that comes from the Shastra. One of those voices comes from Srimad Bhagavatam. If you read the first 9 cantos of the Bhagavatam, you'll develop these qualities of seeing yourself as different from the mind, and being able to have a broader perspective that I'm passing through this world. I'm not really part of it. It's important to go through all the 9 cantos. And then, of course, when you go into the 10th canto, then Atmanyevatmana tushta, then you start to feel the satisfaction of, I have a relationship somewhere. I'm not just detached from the material world, but I actually have a relationship with Krishna. And that becomes more and more pronounced, and it becomes more and more defined as one moves forward. But if you hear Srimad Bhagavatam successively through 9 cantos, and it's important to hear a lot. If you hear a little bit and you feel that your life is you're still in anxiety, and that you're still plagued with problems and so forth, so one of the solutions is you should hear more. In fact, this comes at a very early stage of the Bhagavatam says that the only full satisfaction can be experienced by fully engaging in devotional service. So the more that you do that, the more that you'll get the experience for yourself. And just to mention or read out loud these verses. From Shukadeva Goswami, he says, therefore, it is his own self that is most dear to every embodied being, living being, and it is simply for the satisfaction of this self that the whole material creation of moving and non-moving entities exist. You should know Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. For the benefit of the whole universe, he has, out of his causeless mercy, appeared as an ordinary human being. He has done this by the strength of his internal potency. Whole world's moving to try to find satisfaction of the self. And if you make a mistake and think that I'm the body and you try to get satisfaction, then it's like putting your ladder on a wall and climbing up and then realizing you're on the wrong wall. It's like, I climbed to the top. And they say, so what? You're on the wrong wall. You went to the wrong window, sir. It's on the other side of the street. Like in Toronto, when the devotees bought their temple there, people were disturbed in the neighborhood. There's an identical church across the street. So somebody hired an arson to burn the temple down, and they burned the wrong church. But the devotees are up so early in the morning for Mangal Artik, they called the fire department and they saved the other church, not knowing it was meant for them. The people make mistakes all the time in the material world, but the biggest mistake is thinking I'm this body, and then you go to all the trouble, you pay everyone all the money, you get established in a certain way, and then at the end they say, hey, you did the wrong thing. Right? You invested in the wrong place. That's a big shock. Okay, yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So when the verse number 56, you are reading the purport, there was one statement there where they're saying that I am only worthy of more troubles. And I was reminded of in 11th canto, Krishna was telling Uddhav about the Avantik Brahman, and Avantik Brahman was also thinking the same way, that all these bad things are happening to me because of my past karma, and I'm only worthy of more troubles. It's just that Krishna has made it a little bit more easier for me.
If you can do that, if you can develop that perspective, then Lord Brahma says that you inherit the kingdom of God. So it's an attitude worth developing, because that is the attitude that allows you to leave the material world and enter into the spiritual world. Is it easy? Not really, because the tendency is to think, why me? And, I'm a perfectly good person. Why did anything happen to me? That's due to lack of perspective. Yes.
The point that you told about no satisfaction in the material thing. So I know one of my friend, the recent iPhone came, and then he got the recent iPhone and everything, recent camera, everything. And then he told me, okay, now enough. I think I don't need anything for my life. I'm very happy. And then I saw that after some time, again, he went and whatever the new iPhone came. I was just thinking that and I was just thinking, wow, what a fool. And he's just getting enamored by whatever the new thing is coming, though he doesn't need, but he's just collecting everything to because that he has not got that knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. So that was one reflection, no satisfaction in the material thing. And Maharaj, one question I have.
Okay.
So you mentioned that fear, you told two reasons for fear is one is when we are attached to the bodily things, or when we are fearful of the personal existence. But I find sometimes like devotees, those who are devotees in the sense they got Krishna consciousness, and when they are in USA, they are fearful that if I lose my job, then I have to go back to India or anywhere, and I will lose my services here in USA. So I don't know which category this fear comes, and how to remove this fear, or is that which kind of fear is this?
Well, I've seen so many times people say, I'm going back to India, I lost my job, and then they go to India, then they come back. So I've lost my fear. Not entirely, but a lot of it. I mean, I remember when SKP, he was first here, and then he said, he was, tears were coming from his eyes, and I said, what's the matter? And he said, I have to go back to India. And then I started crying, and then he left, and I was crying for 29 days, and then he came back. I said, what are you doing here? And he said, it just reversed. I came back. I didn't even know how it happened. But the material world moves around. I mean, for devotees, it takes some adjusting, because we're also in the throes of the movements of material nature, as we have responsibilities to fulfill, and we have to apply the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and the process as we live our lives. That's not a bad thing. Vidyam cha yas tad vedo bayam saha avidyayam ratum tirtva vidyayam ratum ashrite. Only one who can learn the process of nations and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. And there's a system for doing that, yukta vairagya, and the process of sixfold process of surrender. It's a template that one can follow as one's living out one's life in the world and getting inevitably moved around by material nature. You have to make decisions. You'll be forced to. And if you make those decisions based on the process of what's best for my devotional service and what are things that are unfavorable, and let them go, naturally then you won't feel that kind of fear. You'll see that the world's moving in a certain way, but because I'm applying the scriptural principles as given by Krishna and the great acharyas in how I move in the material world, I have no fear. It'll turn out okay. You can't make a mistake that way. If you base your motivations on how you make your decisions on what's best for my service and how to avoid things that are unfavorable, you make your best choice that you possibly can, and then when that happens, then you depend on Krishna for the rest. There's only so much that you can do about what happens in the material world. But if you do your best to connect it to the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, then you won't feel disappointed or fearful. I mean, at a certain point, when things become inevitable, you take it as destiny. Things that you can't do anything about at all are destiny. Did you know that? Yeah, and when that happens, if you keep two categories in your life, you realize there's things I can do something about, and there's other things that are destiny, and there's nothing I can do about them. You ever run into any of that?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you're able to compartmentalize those things and say, here's what I can do something about, and I'll do something about it based on what is recommended by Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And here's a whole bigger category of things I can't do anything about, and those things I will leave to Krishna. Just let it roll. And if you can develop an overarching faith that the way the world's moving, and because I'm depending on Krishna for the way I can move in the world, that he'll make everything come out okay. Don't give up. Have faith and patience. And you'll see in time that things will be fine. If you have faith in the process of Krishna consciousness and you're patient, because things take a little while to turn all the way around and come back the other direction. So you have to have faith and patience, and you'll see in time that things will be fine. Didn't you just make a point? Okay, let's take a few more, although your points are excellent. Oh, Satyadev. right all the way to the back. And of course, I'm the warm-up act tonight because we've got Vrindavan. I saw he's here somewhere. He'll be giving a 5-minute Bhagavad Gita class in just a little while. Satyadev Prabhu, thank you very much for jumping in.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, a couple of points. I really enjoyed or appreciate the point that you made that we cannot just leave the mind, we have to have somewhere to go. And Krishna says that's the self, and that's where we'll find satisfaction. And actually, this verse 255 is one of my favorite verses because I love it when Krishna can succinctly answer such a deep question and make it so clear that it's just only he could do something like that. And also the way the question comes about, the reason Arjuna asked this question, it's really because of the previous verse that Krishna, he mentions the idea or the notion of transcendental consciousness. And then Arjuna is thinking, well, what's that? What is transcendental consciousness, and how can you tell when someone has actually attained transcendental consciousness? And then Krishna gives this wonderful explanation that if you know the direction and the way, and you can directly perceive the self, you'll find satisfaction, and you'll see that the desires that are arising in the mind are actually not a source of satisfaction, that they're illusory, then problem solved. But without that direct experience of the self, just trying to use the mind to understand the self, conceptually, it won't work. It doesn't work that way. That one actually has to have a direct perception of oneself, that one's divine nature.
Yes, thank you. Very important to remember that. Right next to you, you can pass.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna.
I like the example you gave about paid off debts. So one can realize right away that I'm not part of this, and that this is not mine altogether. So it just helps us understand we are not this body, and we are different than the whole thing. So it's just instant realization. I think one can get deeper into that point that you mentioned. I really liked it. Appreciate it.
Yes, the Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma, the sense in which when one does see the self, there is an instantaneous experience of relief, a grand relief. I mean, you can imagine all the reliefs we've had in our life. I mean, how many times have you felt some relief in your life where you thought you had something and then you had all the tests and you're waiting for 3 days and they go, you don't have anything. Or some legal matter waiting pending, and then they say, hey, you won the case. And what kind of relief? If you take all of those put together, it can't equal millions and billions of those kinds of relief. What Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma is, it's all of them multiplied trillions of times, unlimited times, but then it's gone. The whole concept that I'm part of this world and that I'm going to die is overbearing. Identifying with that constantly, 24 hours a day, either knowingly or unknowingly, is a great crushing burden. Nishpidyamanam karsha vibho prapannam. Prahlad Maharaj says to Lord Nrsingadev, I'm being crushed here by a big wheel. You imagine these huge stone wheels and they're moving, and he says, that's what's happening to me. I'm being crushed by this process of time and my identification with the material world. And you can imagine this Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma, that when one has a glimpse of one's actual nature, that I've got nothing to do with this. It's like the greatest relief one could imagine. And of course there's this happiness, and that's only the beginning. Krishna says in that verse, Mad Bhaktim Labate Param. This is when you start to gain ground for actually entering into your relationship. That's the doorway. If that's the doorway, what's the relationship like once you walk through it? and to have a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then there's an ever-increasing spiritual bliss that occurs from that ever-growing relationship. There was a few more. Yes. We have in the front row, we're good.
Just before coming to the class, I was in the car, I was just going to the same verse, 256.
Really?
Yeah,
Must be in the air.
I was just thinking that how Krishna is talking about not being affected by the threefold miseries, and then he says that also he talks about not being affected by attachment. I was thinking how that is possible. Then when I went through the purport, Prabhupada was mentioning so nicely that when you engage yourself in Krishna's service, then automatically you will be able to achieve these things. And when I was, just before I was in the school, I was distributing books. I was telling one student that, hey, this book is like 5,000 years old. He was, what? Then he was saying, oh, if it survived for 5,000 years, there must be something in it. Otherwise it wouldn't survive. Then I was thinking, and when I went through the verse, I was thinking how this principle is so universal that people get affected by fear, attachment, and then they get like very anxious. So I was just appreciating that how Krishna is actually giving a very clear-cut psychology of the mind, like how it works.
Yes, very clear-cut psychology of the mind, and that's helpful in convincing us that this is a very authentic knowledge. This is something of what I was describing earlier of reading the Bhagavatam, which also gives very detailed explanation of the psychic movements of the living entity and the ways, the kinds of ways in which we become entangled and disappointed and elated and so forth. And when we hear these things and we're able to relate to them as very accurate, understand them as to be accurate, then we develop more and more faith that we're being guided properly. Even in the parts that we can't relate to, then we start to see, oh yes, well these must be true also because the other ones are so accurate. It's very important. So, a couple online, and then we're getting ready to move on.
So, from the Facebook, Maharaj, Sri Avirhotra Das Prabhu also says the same thing about how we love the super self as much as the self, but it's not always an easy thing to do. Loving the super self.
Actually, in one sense, it is easy because it's natural. It's as natural, Rupa Goswami says, as young boys becoming attracted to young girls and young girls becoming attracted to young boys. I mean, how easy is that?
Very.
As my father used to say, it's as easy as falling off a log. You get a slippery log, you just fall off. It's like, that was easy. So in a sense, we already have, we can already comprehend how easy it is to become attracted to the material energy, and that's Krishna's external feature. So for this self to become attracted to the super self, I mean, I understand the spirit in which Avirhotra Prabhu is presenting this, but keeping understanding that actually it's nothing foreign, it's actually natural for us to become attracted to Krishna, is helpful in continuing one's practice until one does have that attraction. And
Deepti Singh, Bhaktin Deepti says that full satisfaction is found only when one is fully surrendered to Krishna.
Nice.
And there's one from Pandit Shivas. First of all, I want to thank you, Prabhu, for a wonderful lecture. I was especially intrigued by the talk about movement. And it made me think that movement is everywhere. From the minute electrons which keep moving around, so that even an inanimate object objects are in a sense also moving, right up to the many universes which are also constantly moving. Even in the metaphysical sense, a living entity is constantly growing physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The Bhagavatam 2.1.11 states that even those who are free from all material desires should also constantly chant the holy name of the Lord. in that sense, our devotional service is also a process of constant movement. Devotional service gives rise to more devotional service. Thank you so much for your constant encouragement.
And now you know why his name is Pandit. Thank you, Prabhu. It was very nice and helpful. It's important to decide what's most important. This is one of the ways in which one can make progress in any aspect of one's life, but especially for spiritual life, we have to prioritize. And in a general sense, in a macro sense, we have to see the various categories of energy and decide where to invest our attention and our work, in the lower energy or the higher energy. So this is an important thing to do. And also, it's important to have a plan on how to, a plan based on your priority. So prioritization is extremely important. So you have to take time to see what's most important in my life, which kinds of practices will help me the most. And when you prioritize those, then you have to have a solid plan to carry out and make sure that you're connecting with those priorities on a regular basis. And then finally, you also have to take expert guidance. Those who rapidly excel in life, in disciplines, and in learning, are those who know how to find expert guidance. So in the process of spiritual life, it's important to prioritize, then have a plan to stay on track to fulfill your priorities, and then also to be constantly guided, because it requires pinpoint accuracy to be successful, or at least it requires knowing how to come back to the center constantly, and to be encouraged by through proper guidance, so that one can make advancement. And in 7 minutes, we start at 1:45 for the Gita class. Is that correct? Yes. We're going to have Vrindavan. Prabhu has prepared a Bhagavad Gita class. We've revived our 5-minute Gita class. And then right after that, there's going to be an artik. And now we're going to have a kirtan until Vrindavan comes up here. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Different. Okay, listen carefully. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare. Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare, Go Premanande, Haribo. So the 5-minute Gita class is an opportunity for us to hear from various speakers here at ISV. And tonight we have Vrindavan, who has been at ISV since he was born, and been listening carefully to the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. The rules of the 5-minute Bhagavad Gita are that you have opportunity to say your pranams, chant Jai Radha Madhava, and then you read the verse and purport, and then after that, that's when the 5 minutes starts. You have 5 minutes to speak on the verse, and you have to include at least one supporting verse to back up a point, and you also have to give at least one analogy in order to connect to the point. And it also has to be according to the Siddhanta as presented by Srila Prabhupada. And then afterwards, we'll have a few minutes to give feedback, and we give it in a sandwich. The first feedback that we give is what worked well. And then there's a few inside the sandwich of where there's room for improvement. And then on the top part of the sandwich, we have what worked well. And now without further ado, let's invite up Vrindavan. A little more, come on, this is Vrindavan.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Rangana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari So we'll be looking at the second chapter in text 61 of the Bhagavad Gita. Please repeat after me. Tani sarvani samyamya Yukta ashita matpara vase hi yasyendriyani tasya prajna pratishtita. Translation. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. That the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness is clearly explained in this verse. And unless one is Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses. As cited above, the great sage Durvasa Muni picked up a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish, and Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride and therefore could not check his senses. On the other hand, the king, although not as powerful a yogi as the sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sage's injustices and thereby emerged victorious. The king was able to control his senses because of the following qualifications as mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam 9.4.18-20. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayor vachamsi vaikunta gunanu varnane karaur hare mandira marjanadishu shrutim chakar achyuta satkatodaye mukundalingalaya darshane drashav tadbritya gatra sparshikna sangamam granam chitatpada saroja saurabe Srimat Tulasya rasa namtad arpite Padau hare kshetra padanusarpane Shiro hishikesha padabhivandane Kimam chadasye natu kamakam yaya Yato tamashloka janashayarati. King Ambarish fixed his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, engaged his words in describing the abode of the Lord, his hands in cleansing the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing the pastimes of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord, his body in touching the body of the devotee, his nostrils in smelling the flavor of the flowers offered to the Lord, to the lotus feet of the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaves offered to him, his legs in traveling to the holy places where his temple is situated, his head in offering obeisance unto the Lord, and his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. And all these qualifications made him fit to become a Matpara devotee of the Lord. The word Matpara is most significant in this connection. How one can become Matpara is described in the life of Maharaj Ambarish. Sri Baladev Vidyabhushana, a great scholar and acharya in the line of the Matpara, remarks, Mad Bhakti Prabhavena Sarvendriya Vijaya Purvika Swatma Drishti Sulabeti Bhava. The senses can be completely controlled only by the strength of devotional service to Krishna. Also, the example of fire is sometimes given. As a blazing fire burns everything within a room, Lord Krishna, situated in the heart of the yogi, burns up all kinds of impurities. The Yoga Sutra also prescribes meditation on Vishnu and not meditation on the void. The so-called yogis who meditate on something other than Vishnu simply waste their time in a vain search after some phantasmagoria. We have to be Krishna conscious. We have to be Krishna conscious, devoted to the personality of Godhead. This is the aim of real yoga. So in this verse, Krishna is answering Arjuna's question, how a Sthita Pragya engages his mind and senses. So, and here he explains that. He says that to control your mind and senses, we should we should practice Krishna consciousness consistently. And first, to control our senses, we should control our mind. And two things he says in this verse. He says that you should restrain your senses and keep them under full control, and you should keep your consciousness on Krishna. So the beauty of Krishna consciousness is that you can do both things simultaneously by the power of devotional service. For example, a person who taught us this was Maharaj Ambarish. As said in the purport, Durvasa Muni visited his palace and went to take bath, but Maharaj Ambarish was fasting for a year, and the time to break the fast was approaching. So when it was time to break the fast, Maharaj Ambarish, he drank just a little Charnamrit, and when Durvasa Muni came back, he picked up a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish and made a demon to kill Maharaj Ambarish. But Maharaj Ambarish prayed to Lord Krishna and he just prayed to Lord Krishna and tolerated his injustices, and Krishna killed the demon. And how is this possible by Maharaj Ambarish? Because he engaged his senses and his mind in serving the Lord. As said in the purport, he engaged his head in offering obeisance to Lord. He engaged his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord. He engaged his ears in hearing the pastimes of the Lord. He engaged his nostrils in smelling the flavor of the flowers of the Lord. He engaged his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf of the Lord. He engaged his words in describing the abode of the Lord. He engaged his hands in cleaning the temple of the Lord. He engaged his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. He engaged his legs in walking to all the holy places of the Lord. And he also, by the power of devotional service, he consistently practiced Krishna consciousness. He was able to control his mind and senses. And we learn from this example that if we can just control our mind and senses, we can get closer to Krishna. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
So I have a few minutes to give some of the things that worked well. Positive feedback. It's all positive, but we want to talk about what worked well. So please freely, we don't have much time, so freely offer.
I thought he was not nervous. He seemed confident while speaking, so that is good.
He was very familiar with the content. He knew the words, and after reading it, he was able to repeat it verbatim. I was very impressed by that.
Very clear Sanskrit pronunciation. I'm very impressed. Hare Krishna.
He followed the structure very well. He was not fumbling or anything. He followed the structure with the verse and then the translation. Yeah, translation, then and then the purport, the whole structure, and that I think gave him, he didn't have to think a lot basically.
Vrindavan, that was beautiful. I was watching you in the kitchen, and I was really impressed with your ability to make eye contact with the crowd. It's very important when you're speaking to look at everybody that you possibly can, and you did a really good job at that.
Okay. Now a few room for improvement. Room for improvement. One is that you did half of 5 minutes, you did 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So you left us wanting because your speaking was so fluid and your thinking so lucid. You could have gone longer. That's one room for improvement. What else?
Well, just I think in the starting you might wanted to say elaborately like how loudly you tell like it's purport by Srila Prabhupada. I think that sound was little less.
Vrindavan, that was wonderful. One point I wanted to mention, Vrindavan knows a lot of verses, and there could be, as Prabhu mentioned, as a requirement, quoting more verses in support of the context.
Well, I didn't really know that, so I didn't really.
Defend yourself. We're going back into the positive range now. A few things that worked well. Because we have just a few minutes and we want to end what worked well.
Thank you, Vrindavan. You have a lot of confidence, and you can feel that all that you were talking about, it has realization behind it. Thank you.
I really liked how he mentioned all the senses with the example of the service that Maharaj was engaged in, one after another, very clearly. That was.
Overall, excellent job, and I think that we'd like to hear from you more, so plan on giving more talks and study with that idea that you'll be teaching also and speaking for a longer period of time. I felt a lot of confidence in your talk because from hearing other things that you've said and the way that you practice in other ways, had a lot of confidence that you're speaking from a point of realization. So let's give him another appreciation. Sadhu, sadhu. And who's going to do next Wednesday? You should let me know so you can start getting ready. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming here on a Wednesday night. I have an early flight to catch tomorrow going to Southern California, and so I have to head back to the home base just after this talk, and I will be looking forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Right? I'm coming back, aren't I? And in the meantime, please take good care of each other and be a kind friend to all living entities, and at all costs keep the vibration, transcendental vibration going. Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpadurvascha kripasannavevacha patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha gopremanande haribol. If Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki. So if we'll move all the asanas and everything out of the way, then we'll be ready to dance. Hare Krishna.